Welcome back to the Unbreakable Boundaries podcast with your host, myself, Jennifer Manili. I'm really excited about this upcoming guest. I met her. We were doing a red ribbon week, say that 5 times fast, at a local school, which was a really cool experience. A local school actually had me and this person come in and share our stories, which is kind of a little of an anomaly, just because it's like a lot of schools, they don't really want people coming in and talking about drugs, but there's such like an epidemic of this, addiction and substance abuse, and it's kids are getting younger and younger. So I think the school systems are starting to recognize that they got to do something. And so we were 2 guests, which I don't know if you've ever walked into a high school. So we were just talking to the high schoolers, and as an adult to share your story, it's slightly intimidating, but we did it and it was an awesome experience. She had such a great story and we just got to talk, and I was like, man, you really got to come on my podcast, because I feel like she has so much to give and so much to share to you guys that I think can really, really help. So that's the conversation that we are going to have today. And I just want to kind of read you a little bit. Her name, I just want to go ahead and say this before I forget. Her name is Michel O'Hare. And she does some amazing work in this space, even though it's not directly tied into substance abuse. It can, but there's so much more going on with people than just substance abuse, and she helps in that space. So I'm just going to read a little bit about the profile that she sent me, and it says, I have lived through absolute hell and can smile on the other side of the abyss. My life's work is to facilitate healing and to guide people back to the knowingness of their own inner strength, and to not just survive, but to live their lives fully. And this is something that I know a lot of my audience members really struggle with, is not to just feel like they are surviving through their loved one's substance abuse issues. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten on with parents who literally just sit at home all the time. They've put their life on pause. They don't know what else to do, and they're just surviving through life. I'm like, are we just sitting around waiting to die, or what? What are you going to do? They may never change. Is this what you want your life to look like? And so I love when I read this, is not just to survive, but to live their lives fully. So Michel, thank you so much for being willing to be on this podcast.
Thank you for having
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. And so, you said in your first line, I have lived through absolute hell and can smile on the other side of the abyss. So when you say absolute hell, what does that mean? What did that hell look like?
Um, well, growing up, it's like I learned all the things that, the situation should be like with a mom and a daughter, or even a family dynamics. My mom was more like competitive and with me, and used me more like a crutch, because her husband was physically and sexually and psychologically abusing me, and that was something that was like a everyday occurrence in my life. So with that just being said, so I was like, um, I don't know, just pretty twisted up, for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up finally like running away when I was 17, because I couldn't do it anymore. I stayed for a really long time because I was the oldest of 6, and the other 5 were kind of like, I don't know, kind of like my babies.
Mm.
So I had to go, and it almost seemed like things got worse when I left, if you could even imagine.
Sure. I can imagine that, because it's like, one, I have to imagine, and these are some assumptions, so you can fill in the gaps of your own experience, but
Okay.
you left at 17 with very little actual healthy life skills involved.
or any smarts, you know, or
It
any common sense or anything.
right. Well, because your whole life, we're the product a little bit of our environment, right? And
Right.
so it doesn't sound, and I'm making an assumption, but it doesn't sound like you were being taught any sort of way of actually what does it mean to live in this world. There's
Right.
no life skills being brought to the table. You didn't have a
No.
normal upbringing, even when you like went to high school and stuff, because it's not like you're going home and like your focus is on homework or something. It's a
No.
little bit more toxic than that, right? So now
Yeah.
you leave out of the home and now you're in the big bad world with no life skills, no means to support yourself, and no nothing. I can only imagine that things could only from that standpoint get worse.
Yeah.
So, but they didn't stay worse. So that's the good thing. I mean, the fact that you're here today talking to me means that that was just the beginning of the journey, and the journey didn't end there. And
Right.
eventually, you did do something different. But when you left home at 17 and you say things seem to have gotten worse, what did that look like for you?
Well, it's like when you're living in a situation for a really long time, even if it's like hell, it's like you don't really realize exactly what it is that you are living in and in relation in for so many years until you're on the outside, and all of a sudden you're like on the outside looking in, and it all seemed to kind of explode like in my face. And because at 17 you're like you're a runaway.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to go from place to place at that time. And going through school, I was always like dumped because I wasn't the one that was the sexy one. I wasn't giving it up or anything. And so when I went to one of the houses, that's where I was raped, because I didn't do drugs or anything until I was in 17, and I tried weed. And so I was raped, and it just kind of progressed from there with foster care, and eventually I went to live with my dad in Mississippi. And uh, yeah, that took on its own. Ew.
Right. Right, fair. So things got really not great for you. And so what would you say in that time period when things weren't really great? What was kind of like your bottom? What was the worst parts of that?
I believe the worst parts were um, later when I was married to a sociopath, and that was I had my first child. And he he'd abused me pretty bad. He would like he had a drug problem. And I remember I had double hernia surgery, and like 3 days later, he was like beating me up and dragging me across the trailer ground, floor. And other times he would like take my kid and threaten to keep him from me. And that really twisted my brain. And from there, to like escape that horror that I was kind of felt like trapped in, I went in the army. And yeah, so I went in the army, and the army was great on one hand, but it's like if you've had like a lot of abuse and trauma, it's still really hard to have like drill sergeants and also like people that are in charge, thinking you're hot or something like that. It's a lot of pressure, uh, when you're just trying to like make a better life for you and your child.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got out of the military, I mean, not out of the military, but out of basic training and eventually schooling, and got to my first duty station, I was a single mom with my son. And it just, at that point, that's when it just started, like everything, something started to crack,
Mm,
within me.
yeah.
I started to lose it.
So, and this is something a lot of the families that I work with, they didn't have a lot of them didn't have this kind of upbringing or this background,
Mhm.
right? Like
Right.
it didn't look like this, and they're like that all sounds really traumatic, but how does this relate to me? And then they also question like what their loved one experiences and the horrible things that either they do or they're experiencing. And they're like, well, we didn't, raise you to be like this or behave like this. And yet they're doing a lot of the same things that it sounds like that you have experienced. So my question is, at the time that you were experiencing this, if you can remember, and you may not be able to, what were some of the like beliefs that you had about like your life and why? Because this is the question that I get all the time. Why didn't you just leave? Or why didn't you just stop? Or why don't you just
Right.
not do those things? And I think
Mm,
that it's very complicated, right? I think
right.
that's a very complicated answer. It's not just, why aren't you just not do those things? So what
Right.
was like some of the things that was happening internally with you at that time?
Yeah, no, it's really easy, when you're a person who's like not, within that experience to be able to say, you can do this and this, because there's not the underlying belief systems or the feelings and the things that are being shouted at you from within. And so I grew up being told that I was never going to be anything, that I was nothing, that I was basically shit. And I felt I was very unlovable. And growing up being molested, I also had a fear that I was going to become what I had experienced. So that
Mm,
was a really big fear when I had my little boy, even though that wasn't even possible. But to my very young teenage mind,
mhm,
yeah. So I didn't think that I had anywhere else to go. I
mm,
didn't know what else to do. And so I had to eventually find enough courage to say, I can join the military and I can try this out. And so that was a huge leap in itself. Um, but if you're like asking also about like when I'm a kid, that was interesting. It's like I did reach out to people. It's just my mother had a way of manipulating me into
mm,
uh, you're going to put us on the streets, where you're going to go to a place worse than you've ever, experienced, and that sort of thing. And so I didn't want to hurt my family, you know.
right. Yeah. And I think you're hitting on something really important because it's like a lot of times what like the families and the things that we're looking at is what's right in front of us.
Right.
And we don't always get to know all of the underlying stuff that's happening behind the scenes, all of the
Right.
patterns that have been created, the belief
Yeah.
systems, and it's all
Hmm.
that internal noise, right? So it's like
Yeah.
just because someone screams something at you, even though it's like from your parents, not everyone always takes that in and
The same
believes
way.
that. But sometimes, like, exactly, we don't always take that in the same way. But for some of us, we do start creating these belief systems around what we're hearing all the time and
Right.
believing this is as good as it's ever going to be. This was
Yes.
your life. This wasn't like, you know, you were just doing what you knew how to do at the time that you knew how to do it. And you
It's
didn't
true.
believe anything else outside of, well, this must be what I either deserve or what I get,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of times when I'm talking to families, I have to remind them, it's like, there's so much stuff that's going on internally
Mhm.
that you don't get to know about. They may very well have a belief that this is what they deserve because maybe it came, and I don't know, but maybe it came from they did something and they feel so bad about the thing that they did that they believe that they deserve to be punished for the rest of their life and won't ever get any better than this.
Absolutely.
And when you're in that space, when you're in those moments, it can be really, really hard for us to believe anything else because it's not like we have the skills or the people around us that is supporting healthy habits because the people around us are toxic.
Yes,
And they are continuing to perpetuate those belief systems in us because that's who we gravitate to.
that's true.
You know, and so it sounds like there was a lot going on at that time period, that it wasn't just like, oh, I'm just going to not live this way anymore. It's like, well, what does
Yeah.
that even look like?
Yeah, that wasn't even an option.
Right. It
Yeah.
didn't feel like an option at the time. And I think when you live in that kind of a relationship and abuse, I think the concern also is, well, I can't leave because this is a dangerous person, you know? So I don't know if that was something that you feared for, if what would happen if you tried to leave.
Yeah, I had 5 younger brothers and sisters. It was I felt like they would be like 4 of them would be fine because they were my stepdad's biological children. But I had another sister who was 4 years younger than me. And I just felt like her and my mom would get, the brunt of whatever it was that I received, when I left, which is exactly what happened. But I just wanted to do what I could, at a young
Right.
age like that. Yeah, which wasn't much, but
So, obviously we didn't stay there because that's not what your life looks like anymore.
right.
What do you think, where do you think was the turning point for you?
Turning point. Well, I think it was when I think I had the most absolutely horrible thing you could ever have as a parent happen to me. And it was so the son that I was talking about, I ended up losing him when I had like a nice little dance with meth for about 5 years.
Mm,
And the thing is that his grandparents he was staying with, which is my ex-husband's, they kept him from me, and but I did get to meet him, and so obviously there's like a lot to that, but I got to meet him, and he he was so sick, he was so delusional in the things that he was telling me about, like yeah, and I was just sitting there just witnessing this, and there it was god awful, because it's like you see your kid and he's like grown and he's so tall, and I mean last time I saw him he was 3, and he's got these big feet and he's just beautiful, and then he's so sick, he had schizophrenia, and he wanted to come and live with me. And I had 3 girls at the house at the time. One of them is my stepdaughter, because I was newly remarried. And God, I couldn't do it. That was like the only thing I ever wanted, was to have Skylar back and to be his mom and to raise him and stuff. And it's like at that moment, like I always wanted him to ask me, "Hey, can I come live with you?" And
mm,
now that like we arrived at this place, I had to fucking tell him no.
yeah.
And that was the hardest thing. And he's like, later on, he's like, "Well, if you don't let me come live with you," he says, "I'm going to kill myself." And I still couldn't do it because I knew that if he came, that he would be really toxic for the girls,
Mm,
and I just couldn't do that. And I thought maybe you're just making it up, just manipulating me. And then, so from the day that I met him, 6 months later, he killed himself.
mm,
And that's where I honestly would have to say that I was at my second lowest.
yeah.
And yeah, I would get in the car. I would like try to put on that happy, as happy as you can, but have it together to get the kids to school. And after I drop off the one in preschool, I would just drive around. I didn't know
Mm,
where I was going. I was lost.
right.
I was in a pretty dark pit of despair, to be theatrical.
Well, and that's fair. This is like, I think this is every parent's worst nightmare. I know a lot of the families that I talk with, they have these kids out there and they do actually use this as a manipulation tool because they know
Yeah.
that they can get what they want if they just threaten suicide. And sometimes they may mean it at the time, even though they may
Right.
not actually, you know, go through with it or anything like that. They may feel the hopeless despair. And I, you know, where I go with families is not in a mean way, but it's like, how do we not let that impact the things that we know are the right things to do,
Right.
And so here's a really hard question. I'm going to ask it, and we can just have that conversation. It's gonna be uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
But
Go
because
for it.
it makes me even uncomfortable thinking about asking it, but I really think it's an important question.
Yeah.
Would you do anything different?
No. No.
And I think that answer is the most important answer that we can have when we do have someone and we're confronted with something like this, is being
Yeah.
really grounded and owning the answer and why we're doing it, despite the outcome. We don't
Right.
get to control the outcome.
Yeah.
We don't, it could have been so much worse. We don't know what would have ever happened. We can't
Right.
know what would have happened if you said yes. It could be a whole lot worse.
Yeah.
There could have been things. You did it for the right reasons, and you made your decision for the safety of your house and for him. And he did not, again, this is uncomfortable, and I don't mean it to sound callous, but he didn't have to do what he did. He made a decision,
That's true.
and that was not our decision. It was not your decision to own.
Right.
He could have still have ended up that way, whether you
That's
said yes
true.
or no. And then now you have your girls also involved in that. So it's so
Yeah.
complicated. And I
It
want
is.
to honor you and the pain that you must be experiencing, having to go through something like that and to face every parent's worst nightmare out there, while also going, I don't, that was the best decision that I made, and I wouldn't change it. And how do we stay grounded in ourselves when something like that happens with no regrets? We may grieve. We're going to, feel as low as we can possibly feel, but then how do we still carry on in grief without blaming ourselves? And I think that's a powerful statement you just made. One that I'm so grateful that you said, no, I wouldn't do anything different. I couldn't, So kudos to you for that.
Thank you.
It was probably the most powerful no I've ever heard on this podcast, to be honest with you.
Now I had to look at it, over and over, like from different angles, different layers, and not hide from it. So I addressed all those different things. That same question you asked me, like I addressed it from different angles and looked at it in different ways, worded it in different ways, just really making sure that I can get in there and I guess you could say clean out the pipes,
Right.
and that there's nothing like left over that can sit there and trigger and run my life.
So I have to imagine, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, when he first asked you if he could come live with you,
Yeah,
I can't imagine that your first response was no. Like it didn't, I mean, not response, but your immediate reaction was no. It sounds like something that may have been thought about. Am I correct in that?
no,
So
I, yeah,
you already knew the answer as soon as
I,
he
I
asked.
did. I did, and I hated the answer.
Right.
Yeah.
And had you already thought through your answer before you asked?
Before,
Before he
I,
yeah, before he asked you, had you thought
yeah.
through of if he does ask, how am I going to respond? Had you already gone there with yourself?
Well, my husband is a very beautiful human being. We were looking at, he says, okay, maybe we could do this, we can make a room this way, just trying to make the decision to where I could make a decision freely with, with a little bit more clear view
Right.
of it. And so I appreciated that from him, and that he was even uh, willing to even, be open to that, is pretty profound. But even looking at it and seeing that, okay, he could stay here, we could do this, and we could get him on psych meds. And then, and then you go and you look at reality. I have
Right.
not raised him. And I mean, to be honest with you, just a side note, I was able to get him, to stay on schizophrenia medicine for 1 month. But there was not, he's in Mississippi. So, the voices are like, they're trying to change me. And it's just like, oh boy. So, but I knew the reality of, most likely he's going to be 18 years old, 18-year-old is going to be like, F you, I do my own thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
You didn't
Yeah.
raise me, I could see those scenarios coming. And then I also saw the children, and, Aiden, how old was she? She's about 14, and she's a pretty girl, and Skylar's sexually active. And I was just like, I don't like that, and the kids, I want them to be, as best in an environment that's uplifting, and his energy and his, and that would be the older brothers. So they would want to be like him, and let's, oh, we finally get to meet you, that sort of thing, and would glorify whatever it was that he was carrying, into our space. And I was like, yeah, I wish it could be like that little fairy tale of,
Mm,
oh, and
right.
everything be great. But yeah,
So it sounds like there was a lot of thought that went into no and recommitting to the no and going,
yeah,
it's really can't happen. Like it's not good. And then when you have an opportunity to look back and go, would I have done anything different? The answer can still be no, but I'm really fucking sad
yeah,
that this is the way that it went.
yeah, absolutely.
But I have no regrets in the decision that I made.
No, I don't.
And that's powerful. And I think when I look at and I call, this podcast and the conversations that we have the unbreakable boundaries,
Mm,
that's the testament to what I'm speaking about of
okay.
when you look at creating something like that, the unbreakable boundaries, it's something that you are very clear in your yes, and you're very clear in your no, and you're very clear
Yeah.
as into why,
Hmm.
so that no matter what happens, we have no regrets and we
Right.
don't bend because
Mm,
we've been thoughtful, we've been proactive, we've been clear, we know exactly why we're making the decisions that we're making, and we don't regret those decisions and we don't bend on those decisions. It doesn't mean that it's coming from, you know, not a loving place. Came from
right.
a very loving place, both for him and for your other kids that you have in your house, your husband, yourself. This was the
Yeah.
best thing. And again, he didn't have to do what he did. And it's
No.
really sad that he felt that hopeless, that that's where
Yeah.
he went.
Yeah.
And now you said you didn't um raise him necessarily, but you're married, you have 3 kids. He's reintroduced back into your life. That was a very low point. When that happened, you said that there was a lot of layers and you looked at it from a lot of different angles.
Mhm.
Could you share just some of, like, you don't have to go into all of it, but just some of the major points about what were all of the things that you were considering in the different layers that you were looking at, and the questions maybe that you had for yourself,
Mm,
the thoughts that were coming up, the beliefs that were underlying in that. What were some of those things that came up?
mm. That I was a failure.
Mm,
I failed at everything I did, and everything I touched burnt to a crisp. So those were some of
mm,
the belief systems. You know, if only I would have not chose drugs over my son, then maybe this wouldn't have happened. You know, if I could have raised him, maybe he wouldn't have been with such psychologically abusive people. You know, growing up, um, maybe things would have been better. Um, I also had to look at, yeah, um, the shame of not being able to provide my kid with a good upbringing. The shame of, like, that was like one of my biggest goals. Like when I was getting clean from drugs, I was like, I'm gonna be his mother, and I'm gonna do a great job. And that was my life goal right there. I was like, I'm gonna get him back, and I'm gonna be a great mom. And but then that didn't get to happen. And so it was like when he came back into my life, I was like, oh, I get that chance. And it's like, you know. So it was just like the shame of not really feeling like I had anything to offer when he came back into my life, which isn't true because I did have lots to offer. It's just if you don't get that result of the expectations that you hold, then you feel like it's all a failure and that everything's run dry. So
mm.
expectations are um, why we suffer. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. What else? Uh, the guilt of having to tell him no, the guilt of him feeling like he had no other option. Um, yeah. Is that good?
Oh yeah, that was great. That was it. No, that was really powerful. And I think a lot of times, a lot of the families that I, talk to and I work with, even if it's not the exact same questions in the way, because
Right.
their experiences are different, right? So, put their situation, but on the same core things of what you're speaking to, the guilt, the shame, the failureness, what did I do
Yeah.
wrong, where did I, all of
Yes.
that stuff is all of the same, that
Universal.
every family, every parent that I talk to, all these things, it comes up, right? Where did I go wrong? If I could have done this different. I still
Yeah.
have to, every now and then, my mom has gotten so much better because we've done a lot of healing together.
That's
Every
great.
now and then she will still say something that she takes too much ownership over
Mhm.
my journey. And I'm like,
Right.
no, mother,
Yeah.
that was not yours to own. That
Yeah.
was mine to own. You're taking too much responsibility for something that's not yours. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have our things. So, like, guilt, shame, and it sounds like, because I kind of know a little bit more of like where you go now, it sounds like as much guilt, shame, the universal voices, the fears, the self-doubts, the beliefs, you had those, all of the same things, but you didn't stay and live with those on a
Right.
permanent basis.
No.
You looked at that and said, I have these things. We're going to have to go to some places inside to not continue to carry on and live
Yeah.
in this kind of thing. So
I needed help.
what did that look like for you?
Um, so I felt like I was like on this like really dark downward spiral, after just being with that news and just the finality of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I broke down and was like, I'm gonna go get some therapy at the VA. I knew that other things were available, but I wanted to use like my free stuff first. It was just human stuff.
Well, yeah,
And so
of
so I went and
course.
tried that out. And uh I had therapists that would tell me that they were looking over the notes, and before they would see me, they were getting really like nervous and depressed and stuff like that. And I was like, it wasn't like a place. I'm sure they can help other people. It's just they couldn't hold that space for me. And so we have a friend, me and my husband have a friend who is a body talk practitioner. And so I decided to start on that journey, which is consciousness-based healthcare. And so it was like after being like in this like really dark tunnel, just to give visual to it, when I started doing body talk, it was like someone just like opened this window and there was like light coming in, and someone just grabs your hand and says, here.
Yeah.
And it was it was miraculous. And so
Can you kind of dive a little bit into when you say body talk? What does that look like? What does that mean? What are you doing?
okay, so what are you doing? I know, right? So if anyone's ever heard about like Reiki or whatever, that's like energy medicine. So my husband refers to body talk as like Reiki on steroids.
Okay.
So basically, if a person comes in, um, whatever is your priority will come up in consciousness as a formula, and it's like a mathematical formula. And your formula could have like an active memory of something that happened at childhood, and you can also have emotions that need to be like released from certain places, and all these things like will, or if you have different like a hip, this hip, it needs to be in alignment with this other hip a little bit more.
Mm,
My SB is kind of stuck. And a lot of times when people go through fear or startle, even at a young age, your SB will be stuck, and that'll like help you to stay like switched where your thinking's cloudy, and your what would you call it, your pituitary gland isn't working, so you're not getting all those hormonal
mm,
releases. So anyway, this is like all coming in items like in a formula, and so they have to figure themselves out in order to get the results. And so does that answer your question?
yes. So I kind of like I'm gonna do my best to try to put this in words
Okay.
of what I think of how I understand it. So
Okay.
it sounds like for people who aren't like very familiar with this,
Right.
when we get really tense, we can honor that if someone puts their hands on our back and we have really tight muscles, we're like, oh
Mm,
yeah, I've been really tense. Like I've been really stressed out. So we can admit to ourselves that our body is holding on to tension in terms of creating stiff muscles in our back. What I hear you saying is instead of just exploring just the tenseness of the muscles in the back, we're actually going to go a little bit deeper because we have other places in our body that are holding on to tensions that we may not be aware of at this present moment. And we're going to start exploring. So maybe, you have tension in your hip.
right.
And if we can explore that, if you're having pain in your hip, what's the tension? How is your body holding on to the tension? What is it holding on to? And maybe we can,
And why?
and why, right? So it
Yes.
may be something that, something happened. This goes a little far back, but it's like something that maybe happened that when you were a kid and you've been holding
Mm,
on to it in your legs. I'm just making this as an example, but
yeah.
you're holding on to it in your legs since you were a kid and you weren't even really aware that it was there, but you have bad knees now.
Right.
And so now we can explore maybe the tension around your knees and how that stress is impacting you, why, and maybe we can relieve some of that stress. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's
In a very
I think it's a good
simplified.
simplified. Yeah, I mean, you could come in and you could say, okay, because I'll have people fill out like a little small intake form, and they'll put their stuff on there, and they'll come, okay, and so I'll be like, well, what's your intention for this session? And people will be like, oh, okay, so I have, um, you know, let's say I have a client who had issues with her spine. She got in a car accident and her spine was injured. She had rods in her spine and
Mm,
stuff. And so once we like went into um, once we went into what happened prior to that, when she was, let's say 17, and she got some GHB in her drink, and that sort of thing. So anyway, when that active memory was resolved, which is done more or less like EMDR, but I call it like EMDR with steroids. You really get in there with the memory and you take away the charge, because that's what we're suffering from. It's not just the memory, but the emotional charge that's around it. But
right.
anyway, when that was resolved, she could stand up straight again.
Mm, wow. So there's a lot of times, and this is just another layer to it, but a lot of times there is like a physical trauma that happens with people. So like you just said, a car wreck,
Mhm.
right? And then, years later, they're still having a lot of pain.
Mhm.
And I'm just, again, this is just my simplified version of how I'm understanding it. But because I know this is a lot more complex, but, um, they may be having also physical trauma around their injuries that you can help maybe relieve some of that trauma that they're experiencing from like the car wreck and the memories holding on to the trauma of it to help kind of support them in healing mentally from it. Is that
Yes, I
kind
mean,
of
from my experience, like let's just say, first time I was molested was when I was 8, and that was like a really traumatic thing.
mhm,
I can talk about it like, oh, my socks are maroon right now, because
mhm,
you really get in there and you let go of all of the pain, all of the guilt, the shame, and all those things. It's almost like a deep cleaning.
right,
Um, yeah. And so it's like with, this one's a very smart one, because it's a modality, because it goes off of what someone's ready to look at. So we'll do like basic like balances and stuff, just to kind of work you up, and then when you're ready to go into a little bit deeper things, then your subconscious lets lets us know.
right.
Yeah.
So this is something that you started doing for yourself when you couldn't get help
Right.
from like the services at the VA, and you're going in and you're talking to, I'm assuming, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was like, your basic counselor or
Yes.
therapist, and you know, you go in and you start talking, but you're not really getting anywhere. And you're like, I
No.
need to get somewhere else. Like I need to
Right.
be in a different place.
And I don't know how
Um,
to get there, so
don't know how to get there by myself.
yeah.
If I knew how to get there by myself, I'd be there.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so now I need, like, this is not helping. Like I think, sometimes that's a very helpful thing depending on what a person needs. And I think
Hmm.
that sometimes we need to try different things. And so you tried this
Right.
thing for yourself,
Yeah.
this body talk, and you're like, look, I don't know what this is or what this looks like, but it seems like maybe it could help. We're going to give it a shot. And
Yes.
um now when you first went into it though,
Hmm.
were you like completely open to the idea of it, or was there like some resistances that you may have had initially?
No, me and like, I understand where resistances come from because it's really not your, run of the mill, ways of therapy. But no, I was wide open. I was just like at that point of I'll do anything,
Right.
you know? Hmm.
Yeah. Because you're like, I just don't want to feel like this anymore. And I'm willing to just
Yes,
do anything.
I
And
wanted my life, you
right.
know?
Yeah. And at any point, um, did, was there any sort of, like questions? Like, what were some of the questions that you had about this type of modality in the
Well,
beginning?
I had a lot of questions because I was very intrigued because, we, especially like with the ancestral clearing and, um, just so many things, the epigenetic part of it. And I was just like, what's that? What's that? You know, I was so keen about how, belief systems begin and how they start from one energetic level and make themselves down, their way down to the physical, because it all starts right here.
Mm.
And that is what all of a sudden turns into some sort of physical manifestation. So I loved it. I saw what it did for me, and I always wanted to be a therapist since I was in 8th grade,
Hmm.
and I wanted to help ease the suffering
Yeah.
of people, and then I said, this is my thing, and
Yeah.
I just hit the ground running.
Yeah. And so now you do this for
Yeah,
a living because you were
yeah,
like, dude, look, this helped me so much. I want to take it and expand it and do it
yeah.
for other people as well.
Hmm.
And so your clients see a lot of benefits from this. Does it work for everybody?
Um, so that's an interesting question. Depends on how I believe. Okay, so if people keep doing it, yes, I do believe it does, because there's certain people that are really like, even though they've tried everything and they come to me, they're still like this. If you could imagine like one of those like metal vault doors, to
Mm,
the bank, it's like it's closed. You ain't getting in this
yeah.
shit. And it's like I have clients like that, but it's like if when I get out of the way and not need them to heal, and we take our time and just go at it as they were, because I can find back doors.
Right.
That's one of the beautiful things that I'm given is I will find a back door, and we still see relief. I had a client who came who had like Lyme disease, and we just did little balances you wouldn't think was nothing. We didn't really go deep in it, at first, and her Lyme disease was gone after 2 sessions. And
Mm,
I was just like, wow. So
yeah.
yeah, I would say yes. I always tell people to give me at least 6 sessions,
Hmm.
and if you haven't seen any results, then we can shake hands and go our separate ways.
Yeah. And I think that's fair because I think, 6 sessions is a good time to feel like you get it, you get a kind of a sense of this person that you're working with,
Mm,
right? So like
yeah, yeah.
they get a sense of you, they get
Hmm.
a sense of what the work looks like. Because I think like, because you had mentioned this earlier in the podcast, expectations. You're like, so it's like people, even if they don't know what to expect, we're
Hmm.
human beings and we still come in with expectations, right? And so like
Right.
sometimes like we may not have a bigger picture or we may not know and we won't get a real handle on what the work looks like for
Hmm.
about 6 sessions, right? And
Right.
then it's like that gives you a chance to really know what to expect, who I am, how I work, and then, you know, kind of where the conversations go and how to even have the conversations. Because I think
Right.
for people that aren't familiar, because I'm in like the coaching space, right? Not
Right.
everybody knows what the heck that means. And they're like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. It takes about that many sessions
Yeah.
just to know how to come into the sessions with an open mind, with no expectations, and to be clear about what do they want to achieve also, and to
Right.
be open to
Yes.
it.
Yeah. And develop that relationship because um, I've heard that, like, the relationship between client and practitioner, coach, whatever it is like 80% of that healing. So it's like when you are in that space of someone that doesn't judge you, that accepts you for who you are, and it's just
Mhm.
there for you.
Yeah.
I mean, that is like life changing in itself, because people that are coming to you with problems, they don't feel like life is there for them, or that their families or anyone is. And so you come into this space and you have someone that's like your friend, basically. It's like everything within you can relax,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, how do like for any of my audiences, do you do it like in person? Is this a in person?
Oh,
Do you do virtual? So you do virtual sessions as well?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if one of my audience members was like, maybe I'm ready to try something different. Maybe I am, like, because you know, w- what you do isn't necessarily directly about substance abuse. And I know that's what this podcast is, but
It
substance
is though.
abuse is never the actual problem, especially because I'm
Right.
working with the families, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Yeah.
like a lot of times the families forget because they're so focused on their loved ones. They're
Yeah.
like, well, I don't have a problem. Well, you don't
Right.
have the same problem. You
Right.
don't have that problem. But there
Yeah.
are things going on, like you spoke about the guilt, the
Mm-hmm.
shame, the questions, the I'm constantly setting myself up for failure because I'm expecting things and it doesn't ever
Yeah.
happen the way that I want it to, and all of those
Right.
things. And then we hold on to that stuff, and now we're stressed
Yes.
out. Now we're in survival
Yes.
mode and whatnot,
Yeah.
right? So it's all about those kinds of things, the things to heal, the things to um really let go of. So if any of my audience members wanted to find you, how would they be able to do that?
Um, well, you can go to my website, which is Body Talk with Michelle, and you would have to probably have that in your
I will have that.
description.
Yes, I will have that in my show notes.
I'll even leave my business email as well, just
Okay.
and you just email me. And first session is always by donation, because I like to give people a chance to see what it is to work together in this kind of way, and
Yeah.
kind of get to know Body Talk. And after that, I do a sliding scale, because I like to keep
Mhm.
this kind of work affordable for
Mhm.
all kinds of different walks of life, but still honor myself as well.
Right. Right. That's amazing. And to my families out there that are listening to this, what what would be one of the final things that you would just want to say to them? The final message for yourself. I know that's a big question. There's so many things, but if you could say one thing to them, what would it be?
Hmm. So it doesn't matter, like, whether you have like a life like mine. Just being human is hard, and so even from childhood we collect all kinds of different things in our buckets. And so without like our permission, we share those things with our children and everyone around us. And so I think it's key for us to take that time for ourselves, because we put our time everywhere for everyone and everything. And the thing is that we can't be that everyone and everything unless we be that for ourselves first. And so by doing that, we can, have some courage and look at that shadow. And then, know that you have support doing it. It's like, I know that we all have to make the decisions and do the things, ourselves, but, you have support
Mm.
and you have someone to guide you. And, and then you can have something better to pass along to your children and to everybody else. Because I mean, all I've seen, in my families, and I know it's no different than anyone else's, is that it's just a whole bunch of recycled trauma being passed down, passed down, passed down. And I think it's a good idea to be the one to stop the cycle.
Mm. That was such a so many things, so powerful to go into that is, and remembering that we are so many things to so many other people, and really remembering to focus on ourselves as well, to be
Yeah,
something to ourselves, and that we don't have to do it alone. And again, it's like, if you knew how to get there, you'd be there.
right.
And that we don't have to do that. We sometimes we can't figure this out on our own, because
No.
we are only today, as we're talking, even just me and you, right?
Hmm.
We have a set of tools and skills at our disposal, and we may come
Right.
across something that is out of our toolbox that we don't have.
Yeah. I have a team. I
Yeah.
mean, like, I get body talk. I also I have another modality, IFS, but I also get internal family system sessions, and I also do that as well. I also get this thing called surrender coaching, and
Mm.
I have a psychotherapist. So I feel like it takes a team,
Oh yeah.
to come at these things, especially if you've had like a lot of trauma in your life. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's good to have
Well,
support.
it is. Well, Michelle, I just want to thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself and this conversation that I know is going to help so many people. So I really thank you for
Awesome.
your time and for your energy. So thanks for
Yeah.
coming on.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for listening to this podcast. If you want to listen to more or find more information out about this podcast and more of what I do to help families, you can go check out my page at unbreakableboundariespodcast.com. It's full of other great podcasts just like this one and other great resources to look through. And please remember to share this podcast with others. You never know who may need to hear this. People are often hiding their battles in this arena, and sharing is a great way to provide this valuable resource to a person you may not even know who needs it. And don't forget, there is always hope, even when things seem the most hopeless.